Hi, I'm Russ Mitchell, Vice President of Broadcast for the Greater Cleveland Association of Black Journalists. Welcome to the first round in our Meet the Candidate series in the race for Ohio's 11th District Congressional seat. For this session, you will see 3 candidates, 3 interviews, about 20 minutes each. They are former Cleveland City Councilman Jeff Johnson, Cuyahoga County Democratic Party Chair Chantal Brown, and former State Senator Nina Turner. We'll have more candidates in June. On behalf of GCLEABJ, thanks for watching.
Our time begins right now. We're talking to Jeff Johnson, who is right now the court administrator for Cleveland Housing Court. He's a former Cleveland City Councilman, former state senator, and Jeff Johnson is running for the congressional seat once held by Marcia Fudge, who is now the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Biden administration. Jeff Johnson, what brings you to this role? Why do you want to replace Marcia Fudge in Congress?
Well, you know, I have a life of public service, so it's an easy question to answer. I have been out in the public, working in a public sector position for 30 years. 23 of those years were elected office. And so it's been a natural joy of my life to be working in the public sector. And I've worked in all 3 branches of government. So I've worked my way through to a point where right now, I'm ready to do the federal level. As people who are aware of my career knows that I have worked in 3 branches of government. Right now, I'm the court administrator of the Housing Court, which is the judicial branch. I was a city council member for 14 years. I did two different election terms. One was in the 80s when I was the youngest elected at 26. And recently from 2010 to 2018, I was a council member as well. And then of course I served with former Mayor Jane Campbell, a member of her cabinet, as Director of the Department of Community Relations. So I've served in all 3 branches of government, and I've also served in both 2 levels of government as a state senator and councilman. So the natural step as a legislator, both in local and state, is to go to the federal level. I am prepared, I'm ready. I love public policy. I think I understand how to connect the dots between problems and crafting solutions. I have the history proven of that, and maybe we can get into some of that today. So I'm ready to hit ground running, and I'm prepared, and I'm qualified and experienced. So it is really an opportunity for me to take my talents to DC on the benefit of 11th District.
You have said that and I'm quoting you now, you have said there's an inability for a system to deal with structural problems based on structural racism. What did you mean by that?
I think that if we look at throughout our community, let's look at the 11th District, which is when it comes to the issue of poverty versus prosperity and the high level of poverty, it is one of the highest in the country. When you look at the inequities of criminal justice system within our health, within our economy, you've got to understand you can't just go after the symptoms. You just can't go after, for example, violent crime without understanding what has come together over years of implicit bias, of actors doing things that have created barriers within our communities. And so in order to be able to deal with our systematic problems, such as poverty, such as violence, such as high rates of hypertension and congested heart failures, you've got to be able to go into a restructuring how we provide investments, how we look at policy impacts. You've got to understand that the issue is really not equality, it's equity. And there's a difference between equality and equity. It's about recognizing how a system has created barriers and how to get rid of those barriers while you're trying to close loopholes for gun control. That is in itself has to be connected to how we have this overflow of guns come into our neighborhoods. So it's a structural thing, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the desperate needs of the cities. I mean, the cities are dealing with infrastructure problems, school problems, health disparities affecting the city dwellers, Black, brown, and white as well. How do you solve these issues, and which one do you tackle first?
I think economics. I think without a doubt, fundamentally, when you look at the 11th Congressional District, you have to deal with the issue of how to do a number of things economically, closing the wage gap, for example, being able to understand that when you have a city poverty rate in Akron and Cleveland, because Akron's in this district as well, of over 20, close to 27%. But then when you look at racial breakdown, you're getting in the 40s, and in child poverty, you're beyond 50%. So without a fundamental change in how we provide for a structure, a pathways economically of getting people out of poverty, getting them, the working class into the middle class, without investments in underutilized communities, for example, where you purposely look into areas to assist. I've never been afraid of the term affirmative action. I absolutely believe that when you're trying to equalize through equity, you have to be able to recognize where the weaknesses are. And economically, you have to be able to support entrepreneurial spirit, for example. In the middle class communities of the 11th district, you've got to be able to support small businesses. Minority businesses have caught hell over the years. African Americans and Latinos, and able to work with apprenticeship programs with labor. So economics, in my opinion, is the #1 issue. I support $15 an hour minimum wage, for example. I led that fight with some others that we failed to put on a ballot. So those, I think, economics.
You know, as we look at what's happened over the last few years, a lot of people have just become disappointed with the way politicians have done it. That politicians have not getting the nation to where it needs to go. Some people say that the professional politician is the problem. How do you counter that? You've been in politics for the last 20-something years. How do you counter that thought?
By drawing a distinction. And the way you draw a distinction between someone who is committed to a profession all their life, just like others who have done it within the private sector, whether it is healthcare or whether it is someone who's dealing with education, being a teacher all their life. I'm a public servant. I have served in public office. And there is a significant reality that we cannot have a society that seeks to be equitable without a strong public sector. Now, career politicians are those who seek to get in office and jump. They don't stay long enough to get anything done. If you look at my career, you'll see different. And so you have to actually also look at achievements. Is the person actually involved with problem solving? And there you draw distinctions between career politicians and public service servants. My mentor, the late great Louis Stokes, for example, served, once he got into Congress in his 30s, he served all of his life, but no one saw a negative career when it came to him because he served along the way. And I think you can see the same with my career and the things that I put forward. So I make it very clear that there are distinctions between those who really do it for love and those who do it for other reasons. And I always have to push back when people assume because I've been around 30 years in public service, somehow that is a negative.
Jeff Johnson, you talk about the years that you served, and certainly you're going to be asked this as you continue in this campaign. Not only did you serve in political life, but you also served 15 months in prison. And you know you're going to be asked these kinds of questions because of extortion, taking extortion money. What do you tell people who are saying that you're not the guy because of your background of taking extortion money and serving 15 months in prison in the late 1990s?
Well, first of all, I don't wait for them to ask me. I bring it up, and almost all the time I talk because it speaks about an experience that's relevant for how I approach reentry, for example, how I deal with the notion that we have to provide within our society second chances. I served 9 years actually in prison, and then I did some halfway house outside, was able to interact with the public outside of that. But nevertheless, that was over 23 years ago. And so there comes a point where our society creates times where you can go and get judged to determine whether you've successfully done what's required of our system in order to be quote unquote rehabilitated or given a second chance. And as you know, the Ohio Supreme Court, led by Republicans, unanimously gave me my law license back. And the court system also sealed my record, which allowed me to run. And then when I came after that, the people within the northeast part of Cleveland voted me back to council. So I have been through the difficulty, learned from it, given a second chance, and people along the way gave me a great opportunity, such as Mayor Jane Campbell, who gave me the first job when I got out. And so I think it's something that I'm not running from. I'm actually trying to explain to the folks, I understand prison reform, which I supported before I made the mistakes. So that's where I stand now. I think it's something that I embrace and I talk about. And I did it throughout, even since I've been here. This is not the first race I've been involved with. Each one of my races, I respond when asked, or I will talk about the benefits of going through that.
One of our members has asked me to ask you this question. One of our members of the Greater Cleveland Association of Black Journalists asked this question. What is your biggest disadvantage in the race? Is it money, media exposure, or is it something else?
Absolutely money. And since I'm talking to great journalists here, one thing that disappoints me, and this is not the first time, is that many times the media will handicap races based on who has the most money. And so money is the difficulty. I have an opponent who is known nationally, who's received the vast majority of her money from outside of Ohio. I have another opponent who certain establishment figures have put their arms around and therefore provided money for. So money there's a big gap. But the difference in this race is that I am not a stranger. The voters of 11th District knows my name. And so there's value in the time I put in and the achievements I've done. So I'm going to make up for that major gap on money with not only what I normally do is that grind it out. The other is being able to know that people know my name and my achievements. And I'm going to rely on that, as well as keep working to make as many contacts I can, and hope that the media, and not all of Russ, for example, Russ Mitchell interviewed me, and there's other media stories, but the national media particularly seems to try to make this a two-person race. And that's disappointing because I'm clearly more qualified, more experienced than the others. And I'm trying to get treated fairly like that and have them look at our issues and look at who we are and what we can bring to the table on day one. So money is definitely the biggest difference.
Let's talk about a local issue, which has certainly been in the news for the last several years. What should be done about the police reform and the consent decree affecting Cleveland police here in Northeast Ohio? What should be done about that, and where are we with that?
Well, we should continue the consent decree. Under President Trump, there wasn't as much care and concern from the federal level, in my opinion. Now that we have Joe Biden in the White House, I believe that the Attorney General Garland will make sure that all of the requirements are fulfilled. I know the federal court's overseeing. I think it needs to stay because we still need to be able to ensure that the training that's necessary to deal with behavioral health issues, to be able to deal with the excessive force issue, and then bring the George Floyd law that hopefully will become national law, to be able to bring that into it and remove chokeholds and no-knock warrants. I think it should stay. But I also believe in another thing. You'll never hear me say the term defund the police because I think that's too provocative. But underlying the reasoning I do support, and that is the redistribution of how we fund and how we define public safety. We need more behavioral health folks, which is addiction and mental health together, professionals assisting the police. We should take off the burden on having our police become more social workers. They need to be less social workers. So I believe in the redefinition of public safety. The city of Cleveland, majority of its money, its general fund money goes to public safety, including EMS and fire. So that's what I would do. I would go in there, and I'm delighted that we're moving in a direction of removing the ability for removing the protections for police from lawsuits if they go beyond the excessive force line. So I have a lot of ideas when it comes to police reform. We need to have, of course, cameras and body body cameras as well as car. And of course, Akron, Greater Akron has to also be instituting this as well, because the city is also part of the 11th district, not just Cleveland. And
Yeah.
all of the suburbs, sometimes one of our biggest headaches are suburban police departments.
Yeah.
They need to be brought into it as well.
I've got about 3.5 minutes remaining, or 4 minutes, or something.
That's
like
it? No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Let's go.
Let me ask you, we've seen insurrections at the Capitol building where you want to work. Just on April the 2nd, we saw a second Capitol police officer was killed by somebody who violated the fence line at the Capitol building. What do we do with the citadel of freedom? Do we lock it up, or does it remain open?
Oh, it's in between. The fencing with the barbed wire has to, in my opinion, has to go down, as they have been taking some of it down. But they do have to reinstitute new protocols, without a doubt. This is not the Capitol building of 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. In other words, we have to do a complete reevaluation of access and what's required when it comes to screening. We also have to be able to, from a national perspective, law enforcement, be able to take more seriously domestic terrorism, and without taking away personal freedoms. It's a balancing test. But some things are difficult to stop, such as when you have people standing outside of checkpoints and they get hit by a car. Now they need to evaluate again how to stop that without putting fencing around. So I think there's a middle ground that can be done. We cannot do it how we used to do it. More, and I support, and I would support when I go to Washington, and enhance security, at least for the next 12 months, with the evaluation of how we deal with domestic terrorism and intelligence, with mindful of people's personal rights as well.
Less than 2 minutes remaining in this segment, Mr. Johnson. Georgia, is this Jim Crow .2 with the legislature and the governor signing new laws in Georgia limiting access to the polls?
Let me tell you,
hurting Black people.
The answer is yes, but it's not just Georgia. It's Arizona, it's Florida. The fact that Florida still doesn't allow for still finding ways to put barriers, for example, to ex-offenders to be formerly incarcerated, not be able to vote, is something that's very difficult to continue to accept. In Georgia, it's not really about the water and the food, even though the problem with that one is not so much the candidates giving it, that they won't let anyone give it within a certain amount of feet, such as the League of Women, and the League of Women Voters. You can get that out. And the other problem, the key thing about Georgia was not the water, it was the control of the state legislature of throwing out the Secretary of State over the state election board and putting their own person in, and then taking half of the positions on the board and putting their people in. And had that been in the case during this last race, Trump could have been more successful at being able to reverse things. So that is really where the Jim Crow situation is as well. And it does other things, like you're not allowed to do a provisional ballot if you're in the wrong precinct until after 5 o'clock. So if you look at, I don't want us to be burdened by the water issue. There's so much more. So absolutely, they're using contemporary things to control the ability for those to freely vote.
We're going to have to end it there. Jeff Johnson, I do appreciate you talking with us, but that's been our 20 minutes or so. Many thanks.
Always great.
Johnson. Yeah.
Thank you, Leon. I appreciate it. And thank you for the organization for giving me a chance.
Jeff Johnson running for Congress from the 11th Congressional District of Ohio on the Democratic side. Many thanks.
Okay, here we are with the current county council person representing District 9, as well as the chairperson of the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, Ms. Chantal Brown. How are you doing today?
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
As I stated, you are currently county council person and the chairman of the Democratic Party. Why run for this position, and why now?
Thank you very much for the question and thank you for this opportunity. Listen, the reason I'm running is very simple. A lot of people are suffering right now. And as the current elected official and the only current elected official in this race, I am the only candidate that has had the unique privilege of governing during these unprecedented times. I have 9 years of consecutive legislative experience, 3 years with the city of Warrensville Heights, and 6 representing Cuyahoga County Council, 10 communities of the 59, from the inner city to the outer ring suburbs. I have the most diverse constituency in the county. I represent some of the most impoverished to some of the most affluent. And the reason I'm running is I want to be a partner to the Biden-Harris administration to help pass an agenda to make sure that the people who have been hurting in this community behind this pandemic and prior to the pandemic get the resources and the recovery that they need.
Okay, now you brought up the fact that you have been serving as an elected official for some time now. During that time, what meaningful legislation have you passed that have impacted our community?
Where do I start? Listen, I'm proud of a lot of things that I've done, but most recently and probably most notably and probably most important to this group, I led the initiative to declare racism as a public health crisis at Cuyahoga County. And this was more than words on paper to make us feel good about ourselves. Politicians do have a tendency to try to do that, but this was very specific. I wanted it to include statistical data around areas that have grossly impacted our community. It includes statistics and information around education, transportation, criminal justice, of access to quality health care. So those things that have been impacting us in a negative way, I was able to get legislation passed during these most unprecedented, challenging, and volatile times with bipartisan support. And I like to say it passed unanimously. And the reason I intentionally included that statistical data so that we would have some metrics and measurements to determine where we are now to where we'd like to be. Another thing that I'm pretty proud of is the fact that I also led the initiative to activate the Text 911 messaging system. A constituent came to one of our county council meetings. He's hearing impaired, and he expressed to us that their community did not have a means to communicate in an emergency situation. I thought that was incredibly dangerous and insane. And so I led the effort to make sure that we activated Text 911 here in Cuyahoga County. Now, it didn't grab a lot of headlines, but it did save lives. It does save lives. And that there's a story actually on Cleveland.com that identified a woman who was in a domestic violence relationship, riding in the car alongside of her abuser. She couldn't call 911, but she used the Text 911 messaging system, and she was able to get rescued on the freeway using that Text 911. Another thing that I'd like to point out, and I'll stop at 3, is again, having to the responsibility, I'll describe it as a responsibility of overseeing the previous COVID package of over $200 million and how it would be allocated to hospitals and small businesses and rental assistance programs, and as well as food banks. And within that $200, what I did was request $2 million be set aside, because what started happening when the children had to transition from in-person learning to virtual learning, many of them did not have access to high-speed broadband internet. So that $2 million that I requested to be set aside was used to provide hotspots and free computers so that they wouldn't fall terribly behind during this pandemic. So those are just a few things. There's a lot more that I could talk about, but those are the things that I'm most proud of.
Okay, thank you. Now, since the very onset of you announcing your candidacy for Congress, you've received criticisms for not stepping down from your chairmanship of the Democratic Party. Some people have stated that they thought it was a conflict of interest. What do you have to say to those criticisms?
Well, what I'd like to say with regards to that is there is no conflict. That was, people are starting to campaign and they're using any tactics that they can. There's actually no conflict. And historically, what we've done as it relates to the congressional races, we've never held endorsement meetings. meetings. So that is simply because we don't have a federal account. This is much different than anything. We are the Cuyahoga County Democratic Party. We deal in county and regional politics, not the federal level. Traditionally, what we do when it comes to our federal candidates, we follow the lead of the DNC, and it's just that simple. So I'm not violating any of our bylaws. It doesn't, I'm not required to step down, and nor will I. And additionally, I think it's a little bit of a double standard there too. Making history by being the first woman and the first Black person ever to hold this seat. None of my predecessors were ever asked to step down when they ran for office. And finally, it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon in the state, and certainly not uncommon in the country, for elected officials to hold dual roles as party chairperson. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, well, thank you. Now, while the person that you are seeking to fill the position vacated by her, Marcia Fudge, while she has not endorsed anybody, you've not made it a secret that you look at her as a mentor. What have you learned from Marcia? Have you spoken with her? What things have you learned from her that would lead you to think that you were ready for this position?
Well, thank you for that question. So yes, the Hatch Act would prohibit any cabinet member from endorsing in this race. But I can tell you this, I've got the support of her mom. But what I've learned from the Congresswoman, now Secretary Fudge, is if you work for the people, then the people will work for you. And you always put the people first has been her motto. And that's something that I learned, is just continuing to really be the best public servant that you can be, and not to get caught up in all of the noise and chatter around you, but to focus on serving the community. And if you stick with the community, then the community will stick with you. And because of her, she's been, like you said, both a mentor and a friend to me. And I think that is the most valuable lesson that she has shared. And it certainly has helped me advance what some people would describe as rapidly in this political world.
Well, and speaking of endorsements, congratulations, as you were just given the endorsement of the United Auto Workers. And you've received several endorsements from suburban mayors, but what you have not received is an endorsement from Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, who has endorsed Senator Nina Turner. What is your relationship with the mayor of Cleveland, and how did you look at not getting the endorsement, specifically from your position as a chairperson? What did that mean to you? What should we take from that, you not getting the endorsement from the mayor of Cleveland?
Well, listen, I think Mayor Jackson is a great guy, and we have a good relationship. I think it didn't come as a surprise to the campaign, because Mayor Jackson and Nina Turner have a long history, and I can appreciate that. So yeah, so it wasn't a surprise to the campaign, and it certainly doesn't change anything from my perspective. I'm running again to be a partner to the Biden-Harris administration. We've got a new administration that's doing some great work. What some might describe as once in a lifetime opportunities that are being introduced. And so what is important is that this community needs a partner. Someone is going to work with the Biden-Harris administration to make sure that they get the resources that they need. So it doesn't change our strategy. It doesn't change why I'm running. Congratulate Ms. Turner on that.
Okay, and you talked about the Biden-Harris administration. How do you see yourself fitting in to this House? We have progressive liberals, we have blue dog Democrats, we have the squad. How do you see yourself fitting into the dynamics of the current Congress?
Well, that's a good question also, and I thank you for it. Listen, as the chairwoman of the largest and what I would like to describe as the most complicated county party in this state, I've got a little bit of experience in that, okay? So having the honor of serving in this role for 3.5 years has given me some good practice on how to find common ground and go from there. Many people ask sometimes, how would I describe myself? And I describe myself very simply as a public servant, and taking that advice of my mentor and now Secretary Fudge of putting the people first. When people need to know about rental assistance, where the next food bank is, what grants are available to them, They don't care if I'm establishment, progressive, even Republican or Democrat. What the people in this community care about is that they have a representative that will help them address their needs and solve their problems. And that is what I have a reputation of doing. And that is why I've been able to earn so much support throughout this community and with my campaign. So I will continue to use that consensus building and issue focused mindset. And I think that's just what DC needs today.
Well, a lot of our members, when we talk with a lot of our members of what questions they wanted, a lot of the members of the Greater Cleveland Association of Black Journalists wanted you to discuss HR Bill 1. Certainly the legacy of this 11th district is vast, going back to the 21st. What is your feeling on HR Bill 1, the effects of the upcoming census, possible redistricting, and gerrymandering by Republicans on a historic area representing the Cleveland area, parts of other cities, Akron? What is your feelings about that bill and about possible redistricting because of impending census information?
Well, we need to get rid of the filibuster first, and that is Jim Crow in modern day. We need to make sure that we remove the filibuster so that we can pass the Voting Rights Act. I think many people, if they don't know, I am probably one of the most fierce and fighters when it comes to voting rights. As the chairwoman of the Democratic Party here, I'm proud to say, while Cleveland did not deliver the results that we may have hoped, but we still were able to break records and deliver 71% of the registered voters in Cuyahoga County. And what that says to me is that when you engage people and when you give them something to vote for, they will participate in the process. Under my leadership, we've had record-breaking voter turnout, both in the midterm and this past presidential election. And some people might be even surprised to learn that while we celebrate Georgia for going blue, Cuyahoga County delivered more votes for Joe Biden from the precinct to the presidency than Fulton County, which is where Atlanta is actually located. So when we're talking about these voter suppression initiatives and the filibuster preventing the HR 1 from passing, it's critical. I can't overstate the importance of how much our votes matter. What they were able to do by getting those 2 senators elected and bringing some type of balance in that narrow majority to DC with the Senate race is so critically important, but there's still lots of work to do. As it relates to gerrymandering, there's been a lot of conversation about how this district will be redrawn. And people have even gone as far as to say that it may not be any longer a majority-minority district. Well, I want to give the people a confidence on this call. The current district that I represent is 60% white, 30% Black, and 10% other. And by having the honor of leading the largest county party in this state, which includes all of Cuyahoga County from the east side to the west side, I am best positioned to retain the seat after winning it. So I would be starting from a deficit. I would be starting from an advantage because I already have relationships with people from the west side of Cleveland to the west side of the county. So regardless to how they draw the lines, I am confident if I win, I will be best positioned to retain the seat if it is drawn as conversations have been discussed.
Councilperson, as you watched, as we all did, what took place at the Capitol with the insurgency, with people storming. This was a building, these were constituents, these were people that you would have been working for if you win this election. What was going through your mind as you were watching this, and what do you feel should be the repercussions for those who violently stormed the Capitol that day?
Well, thank you for that question. I think I watched in total shock and awe, but also the fact that we had a president in office that really led up to this. It really, while as shocking as it was, it demonstrated the clear imbalances and the parities and disparities in our society as it relates to Blacks and whites. We know that the Black Lives Matter they were greeted with armed security. There was no way they even got as close as those individuals did. So it just highlighted some of the differences in our society and the two worlds that we live in. There's a Black America and a white America. But as I watched it, it really made me realize how delicate our democracy is and how important that it is that we continue to fight for it, and that we have people in office that will make unity a priority. And that's really the type of candidate that I have been and the type of candidate that I will continue to be.
What kind of legislative initiatives do you have for schools, particularly urban schools, and those students who have suffered greatly due to the COVID pandemic? Could you talk a little bit about that? The students making their way through the crisis and back academically.
So academically speaking, I have a proven track record in many parts of the education sector. So when we talk about the students and the education gap, and we know that many of them were already suffering pre-pandemic, right? And so when they had to transition from in-person, in-classroom learning to virtual learning, I received calls from many of my constituents expressing that they did not have access to high-speed broadband internet service. So I led the initiative to set aside $1.5 million of our COVID relief funds dedicated to students who did not have access to, so that they could receive Wi-Fi hotspots for 2 years, in addition to working with Peoples for PC so that they could have laptop computers, because too many of them were trying to access their classrooms on their parents' phones, and that just was counterproductive to the learning initiative. In addition to that, I'm also pleased to say that I supported Bob Ivory's initiative, Closing the Achievement Gap, as well as Students of Promise, where he and his team work in multiple school systems, Bedford, Warrensville Heights, Maple Heights, to make sure that those students who have fallen behind are put on an aggressive track plan to get caught up in their studies so that they can graduate on time and also be college ready. He exposes them to so many opportunities in that program. So Closing the Achievement Gap is another thing that I have supported and would love to be able to scale on a federal level. And finally, Say Yes to Education, which is a Cleveland program, one of 4 in the country, where we provide wraparound services not only to the students, but to the families, because we understand it's important that a student can't concentrate on their learning when they are food insecure, shelter insecure, and all of these other things, their parents have job insecurity. So what Say Yes to Cleveland does is they utilize the county's services, the agencies, to make sure that the parents are supported so that the students can really concentrate and get the education that they need so that they could be successful. And once they graduate, then they are in a position to go to college tuition free and not just attend. We provide these supportive services so that they can graduate. So those are the type of things that I have a record of doing, and that I would be honored, privileged if the people of the 11th Congressional District were to elect me so I could continue to do this great work.
And there's so many questions we could ask, but I would be remiss if I did not bring forth a question brought to me by Cleveland's hip hop community. And we've seen you rapping and rhyming about the census. And since Vice President Kamala Harris had to answer a question about Tupac, the Cleveland hip hop community wants to know, which side are you on? Are you Tupac or are you Biggie?
I am a hardcore Tupac fan. Like, I love Pac, but much respect to Biggie. You know, I'm enjoying all of these Biggie movies that have recently come out, but I'm a Tupac girl. Well,
thank you for joining us with the Greater Cleveland Association of Black Journalists, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, former State Senator Nina Turner. How are you doing?
Good afternoon. I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with the Greater Cleveland Association of Black Journalists. We have about 18 minutes, so we're going to jump right into the questioning. Why are you running for this position?
Well, I'm running for this position to continue my public service in this community. I think for a time such as this, it is vitally important to have courageous leaders, particularly in the Congress, to lift and change the material conditions of the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class. My proximity to pain is intact. I've certainly occupied all three of those spaces throughout my life, but by the grace of God, there go I. I want to continue this journey that I've been on to lift the workaday people of this nation, to bring vision and also provision to the 11th Congressional District. I've served this district in many capacities, from being a Cleveland City Councilwoman all the way to state senator, Democratic nominee for Secretary of State in 2014, pushing back against the worst Secretary of State, or maybe I should say one of the worst secretaries of states in this country. And so for me, lifting up the people, we got to center the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class in this country. Right now, they are not centered. We have a system that is run amok, and it is run amok because it answers solely to the cries or to the pleadings, to the vision of those who have the greatest amount of resources. It is untenable, and we have to do something about it. And so I want to continue on this journey that I've been on for a long time in the halls of Congress.
And part of your campaign message is that you're taking on a political establishment. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I can. And thank you for that. And also, I want to thank the organization so much for having me. I should have said that coming out. I know the particular important and unique space that Black journalists occupy. I know that it is hard for Black people in every profession, every field that there is, but particularly now what is going on in print media, especially. So I just want to shout you all out for continuing a strong tradition of Black journalism. Yeah, for me, for example, the COVID crisis has really revealed to us those people who didn't want to admit that they are fissures in this system. They were there before COVID, but they are especially exposed right now. So when I say fight against the system and bump back up against the system, for me, that means Medicare for all. As one example, I believe in the wealthiest country on the face of the earth, we should have Medicare for all. We should not commodify healthcare the way that we do. And we are the only industrialized nation that continues to do so. As I travel the district, as I have traveled this country, the constant that I keep hearing, besides jobs and people who have children wanting to know that their children will have a better life, it is really about having health care. Our health is our wealth. We can't do any other thing without that. And increasing the minimum wage, I think the economic, both racialized nature, I see through a lens of caste and class, and the racialized nature of income and wealth has to be dealt with. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. And the federal government is one of, not the only, but it does carry the biggest stick. And government is designed for us to do collectively what we cannot do as individuals. And so when I say running against a system, I am running against a system that continues to ignore the cries and the needs of the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class. We can do better. People need to demand better than what they are getting. And I want to continue to be part of that, part of the process to help get that done.
And when you talk about Medicare for all, many see this as an ideal in the United States. What do you think needs to happen in order for us to get closer to a system that provides universal health care, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, just do it. As I was saying, every other industrialized nation, and I've been on this Medicare for all journey, since the Senate, but in a deeper way over the last 6 years. Many of you know I was on a presidential campaign, not once, but twice. But for this particular moment, we have 100 million people in county who are either underinsured and uninsured. We can do it. I mean, we have the money to do it. All we have to do is tax the ultra wealthy in this country, and we will have money in the pot to be able to have Medicare for all. When Medicare as it exists right now was conceptualized, it really was supposed to be Medicare for all, but bad politics got in the way, and so it became what it is now. If we could do that, then we can expand the system that we have now to an elder. You will find very few elders who will say to you, even with some of the challenges, because there will always be a challenge in a system of that magnitude, but you will find very few elders who will say, do away with my Medicare. It is a system that works, and all means all, because we need everybody to have skin in the game. By way of example, Medicaid. Medicaid is a mark. You know, I was on Medicaid at a time in my life, but people who are on Medicaid, it indicates poverty. If we do a Medicare for all system, it's everybody, no more deductibles, premiums, and copays. So what I am saying is that where there is a will, there is a way. And Medicare for all is not only the morally right thing to do, it's the economically right thing to do. There are many economists and think tanks who have been very clear that Medicare for all will save money over time. It will help businesses, and we really have to help small businesses who are suffering, and especially in a pandemic. How can we look at the suffering of people and say that Medicare for all is not something that we can have? We can have it, we can afford it, we will have better health outcomes, the racialized nature. I mean, I'm talking fast because I know you want to get to another question, but there's a racialized dynamic to this too. Black women still die at higher birth rates, Black babies still die, or excuse me, Black mothers still die at higher maternal death rates. Our babies die at higher rates when they're born. Even in some places in the 11th Congressional District, there are places where you live in one place, you lose like 27 years on your life just because you were born there. Medicare for all will go a long way to help level the playing field when it comes to access to healthcare. No more deductibles, no more premiums, and no more copays. And lastly, on this point, I'm sure you all can tell how passionate I am about this, and primarily because my mother died at 42 years old, a very, very young age, and the stressors that were put on her. And I see it through the lens of all people who are suffering. But I will tell you this, people will be more mobile too. I mean, in terms of portability for employment, they can dream bigger dreams. They don't have to be tied to a job that they may not like. They can become entrepreneurs. So in my estimation, not just my estimation, also the estimation of economists, Medicare for all would save this country so much money. And on the moral side, it will save many lives. We can do it.
So do you think that this is one of the most pressing issues for the 11th Congressional District? And if elected, is this legislation that you are looking to, push to sponsor, to bring forth to Congress?
I am, and there are many, and I won't be the only one. I've been on the journey for Medicare for all side by side with Senator Bernie Sanders, but there are others. Really, the nurses are the ones, and I just got to shout out the National Nurses United. The nurses are the ones who've really been in the vineyard pushing this issue that we need Medicare for all. And what better group to tell us that we need this than the nurses. So yes, I will be there right by the side of the Progressive Caucus and other members of the Congress. Even Congresswoman Marcia Fudge signed on as a co-sponsor to Medicare for all. So yes, I will be right there. And the nurses, as a matter of fact, endorsed my candidacy as well.
Former Senator Turner, many believe that the statement that you made, during current President Joe Biden campaign presents a problem, makes you appear as divisive. What do you think that if elected can be done to maybe mend the relationship if necessary? And how do you think people in the 11th Congressional District who support President Biden would respond to you as a candidate in light of that?
Yeah, the citizens of the 11th Congressional District can support me and have supported me. Half of my Senate district was in the 11th Congressional District. My comments were about a system, not about the two individuals at the time. It's about the system that oppresses the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class. And you know what? I really do. I wish people were more offended about the fact that Ms. Johnson can't afford her prescription drugs, or Mr. Jones is too afraid to go to the hospital, or our children don't have the internet connectivity that they need in the face of a pandemic to learn, than they are about some colorful words that I may have used to describe neoliberalism and neo-fascism. When it comes to President Biden, I am sure that there are many, many, many things that we are going to be able to agree on and work with. And my last point to this, I'm sure many of you who watched the presidential debates remember when Senator Harris called out then Vice President Joe Biden over his record when it came to busing. And she pretty much called him a racist during that debate. You guys can go back and roll the tape if you don't remember that. And I bring that up as an example because if Senator Harris at the time then, before all the world, could challenge the vice president on his record when it came to busing and Black children, I remember her clearly saying, I was that little girl. If they can unite together and be president and vice president, then surely surely Senator Turner and hopefully Congresswoman Turner can work with that administration. I look forward to working with that administration. As a matter of fact, I have a bipartisan record. I united with Governor John Kasich to create the task force on Ohio and police relations. And God knows the governor and I, we jousted many issues. But when it came to getting down to it and doing something that would help this community, something on a humanitarian level, we put aside who was the Democrat and who was the Republican, who was the conservative and who was the progressive, to do what was right. And not only did I help create that task force, he made me a co-chair of that task force along with his safety director. So that's just one of many examples. I have the endorsement of Mayor Jackson, Frank Jackson. You know, if you look at the endorsements that I have, they bring all of the different strains within the Democratic Party together. That shows you that I am a coalition builder. Yes, I will fight hard for what I believe in. I can work with anybody, but working with doesn't mean acquiescing to.
Education is a major issue here in the 11th Congressional District. And as state senator, you supported expansion of charter schools. Where do you stand on charter schools now? Do you think that public education should receive more investment?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. I was on the education committee. I am an educator by vocation. I was a tenured professor, educator at Cuyahoga Community College. I'm a product of the public school system. What I supported in the Cleveland plan was a way to get a levy passed. I supported the children of the Cleveland public schools. I am a product of that school system. So is my son, my entire family is. I live in the city of Cleveland, not around the city of Cleveland, in the city of Cleveland. And we had not had a levy in 15 years. What I supported was the opportunity to get the voters of the city of Cleveland to vote for a levy that not only would support our children, but also support our teachers. I think what many folks don't remember about that moment is that Cleveland was one of the worst school districts in the state. And as a matter of fact, was on the verge of being taken over. It was going to be taken over by the state. And the mayor had a vision. He wanted to ensure that it was not taken over by the state. And so he came up with a plan and he asked some of the Cleveland legislators to help him with that plan. That bill started off one way, it ended in another way. And thank goodness that by the end of the process, we had the Cleveland's Teachers Union standing in the red room side by side with Mayor Frank G. Jackson, with Senator Nina Turner and Governor John Kasich.
Senator Turner, we have about maybe a little less than 5 more minutes, and I want to get 2 more really important questions in. President Biden just recently presented $1.9 trillion infrastructure bill. What would you do if elected to ensure some of those dollars come into the 11th Congressional District, and what would you think it would be best utilized for?
Yeah, I mean, lobby really hard. I mean, we have lots of infrastructure needs. One thing I can think of is drawing out the lakefront and building that out so that it connects communities from the greater Akron area to greater Cleveland area. We have, you know, roads and bridges. We have water lines that need to be repaired. All of those infrastructure needs twofold. One will help us come up to the 21st century when it comes to infrastructure. And the other very important thing is to put people to work in good jobs, good union jobs. That is one of the greatest needs. 50% of the children who live in the 11th Congressional District live in poverty. When you add their families, it goes up to over 60%. And so having those types of jobs, the economic viability of those infrastructure dollars, and then also what those infrastructure dollars can do to build up our region. And all of those things have connectivity to, there's a bubbling, there's a synergy that will happen when those kind of infrastructure dollars are invested in our community.
And, you know, it is believed that Democrats take advantage of the Black vote. And your campaign probably has more staff than any other campaign in this race. So the question was asked, how many people do you have on your campaign staff? And how many of those are contracted? How many are Black? And also, how much do you anticipate spending with the Black media?
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I've been in contact with Dr. Ben Chavis. I plan to spend money with Black media. I advocated for spending with the Black media even when I was on a presidential campaign. I have about 20 staff members. My deputy campaign manager is a Black woman. My campaign is very diverse, extremely diverse in terms of identity, race, and ethnicity. My contractors are diverse as well. And I continue, you know, I see myself very much for this time as you know, when you raise the level of money that we're raising, you have the authority to be able to spend that money. I've invested in public, you know, I've always spent that money in a way, no matter what campaign, whether it was running for Secretary of State to this campaign right now. So not only do I have Black staff, I have Black consultants, and then I do have a very diversity is key. I believe in the Rainbow Coalition in the same way that Reverend Jesse Jackson did. I believe in bringing people together in the same way that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But the highest levels of my campaign has African-American staff there running the campaign. My number 2 person on my campaign is in fact a Black woman, diverse staff, ethnically, racially, religious-wise, orientation-wise. My campaign represents the rainbow that is the United States of America. And that, quite frankly, is the 11th Congressional District. And I plan to continue to empower, especially Black people, but I plan to empower other people as well. And my campaign supports local businesses too. So I'm getting things printed. We do that deliberately. You have to do that deliberately to say that you're going to do that. And I take great pride at doing that and pushing the Democratic Party to do more of that, because we know at the DNC too, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. And at one time, only less than 1% of that was being spent with the African-American community. So I am extremely sensitive to that question that you raise, and will always continue to have an eye towards diversity, but ensuring that the African-American community is represented in all facets of my campaign.
We probably have less than maybe 30 seconds left. What do you see as the top 3 issues plaguing the 11th Congressional District that, if elected, you know, immediately you would tackle?
More relief for COVID. That is the most important thing right now. We can't get people to thrive until we tame COVID, and you know, addressing poverty. That is vitally important to me. So that's where I am going to start. And my opportunity agenda, I would just describe everything that I'm working towards as an opportunity agenda.
Thank you so much. We have just wrapped up a conversation with former Ward 1 Councilwoman Nina Turner, former 11th District, State of Ohio State Senator. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon.
Oh my God, thank you all so much for having me. I appreciate you and all the work you do.